Hello and welcome back to Underlab. Gaster is Undertale's biggest mystery, with various secrets connecting to him and a plethora of fan theories that have tried time and time again to explain the mysterious former royal scientist. Still, no matter how many people claim to have found the truth, new details are always emerging and potential explanations are put to the test. One question rarely focused on, however, is the final experiment that Gaster carried out. In Entry 17, an obscure piece of text written in wingdings that is thought to have been written by the scientist himself, he remarks on an interesting experiment relating to darkness. What was this, and what relation did it have to Gaster's eventual disappearance? Well, it's time to find out. So let's take a look at Gaster's final experiment. To start things off, let's take a quick look at some of the encounters featuring Gaster. I've been over most of this stuff before in my video titled Gaster's Final Secret Revealed, and so I won't dwell on it for too long. At the same time, a quick refresher can't hurt, and most of what I'm about to go into won't make sense without an explanation. Gaster is the former royal scientist who was replaced by Dr. Alphys when he was shattered across time and space. We discover this by talking to grey NPCs throughout Hotland, which only appear when an internal value within the game's files, known as fun, is set to a certain amount. I've talked more about that in my video called The Secret Meanings of Words in Undertale, so be sure to check that out if you want to know what exactly fun is. Another grey NPC found within Waterfall known as Gonakid seems to be referring to Gaster when he explains that his deepest fear is to not exist, which is certainly something that appears to be afflicting the former royal scientist. Finally, there's Entry 17 itself. Entry 17 is found within a room only accessible by altering the game's files, and here we're shown a jittering message written in wingdings as a disturbing and distorted voice reads to us. Translated, it speaks of how darkness is growing, while Gaster asks what two unknown people think, after he mentions his next experiment seems very interesting. At this point the game crashes before we're able to learn anything more. This is the experiment I refer to as Gaster's final experiment, as I believe it ties into why he vanished and was never seen again. Firstly, let's examine a key line within Entry 17, namely Photon readings negative. Now, I'm no scientist. Wait a second, I am a scientist. Who wrote this script? Anyhow, let's try to keep things simple. Photons are responsible for carrying light, and therefore if photon readings are negative, that means there was no light during Gaster's experiment. Whatever he was looking at must have been pure darkness. In the real world, scientists have developed a material called Vanta Black, which is far darker than the colour black, due to how it absorbs almost all light that comes in contact with it. What Gaster was looking at must have been as dark as Vanta Black, or maybe even darker, to a point that real life science hasn't reached. What's the darkest thing you can think of? To me, it's a black hole. Black holes have a gravitational field so powerful that no light can escape it. It sounds to me that Gaster was performing an experiment similar to the real life Large Hadron Collider. In real life, there was huge concerns that the collider, made to test quantum theory, could generate a black hole. While this was mostly the result of scaremongering news and theories rather than facts, the Large Hadron Collider wasn't what Gaster was using, so perhaps he created a device that could indeed rip apart space and time and create a black hole. Now, there's a few details that need explaining if this is indeed true. For starters, the Large Hadron Collider is extremely large in order to generate the power it does. You may be wondering where Gaster's experiment is if it's so big. Well, look no further than the core. While the core's primary function is to generate what's called magical electricity for all of monster kind, I don't see why Gaster mightn't use it as a particle accelerator as well, in order to test any theories he may have about quantum physics. Where exactly Gaster was when conducting his final experiment is a mystery, though we do know where the machine that triggered his shattering is located. In Sans' secret workshop, only accessible by an excess of time travel, we see the remains of a broken machine that has been covered up with a blanket. When we accept the clear link between Gaster and Sans, for example the Gaster blasters that Sans uses, it doesn't seem like a stretch at all to suggest that Sans was one of the characters whom Gaster was referring to when the experiment took place. After witnessing the royal scientist be sucked into oblivion, the machine was broken, and so Sans must have taken it back with him in order to attempt to fix it. With him, he seemingly brought the original schematics for the device, which are written in strange symbols that are likely wingdings. Therefore, Sans brought back with him the machine that enabled the core to generate what were potentially black holes. This also explains the quantum physics book Sans has that's disguised as a joke book. It's clear he's been reading into the subject as he tries to work out how the former royal scientist could be saved. However, he's evidently not made much progress, likely because Gaster's genius was quite literally unique. As the grey NPCs say, his axe was quite something for Alphys to follow, and in many ways, he was absolutely irreplaceable. Of course, if Gaster made a black hole, you may be wondering why the entire underground didn't simply implode on itself. Once again, however, the exact specifics of what Gaster was experimenting on is unknown. Maybe what Gaster really created was a wormhole, a theoretical tunnel of sorts that could link together universes and different points in time. Maybe the wormhole just so happened to lead to a point in time where everything was gone and only darkness remained. No wonder why he found things so interesting if he was able to glimpse into the future, a future where everything had been utterly destroyed. Perhaps the same future that Sans references on the genocide path. He mentions that there's a point along the timeline where everything simply stops, and he realises that you're most likely the one responsible for it. This non-existent void is actually something that can be found within the game. After beating the genocide path and encountering Chara, or Kara, should we exit the game and restart it, we're left to stare at a black screen with the sound of wind, and are forced to wait until Chara reappears. This is undoubtedly the end of all things that Sans was referencing, and perhaps the point in time that Gaster was first warped to. Upon realising the terrible future that awaited monsterkind and all humanity, Gaster surely wanted to travel back into the past and warn everyone he could. Instead, however, he was shattered across space and time, reappearing only under very specific circumstances. Why was this? Was it a byproduct of the experiment? Or did the player, or Chara, destroy Gaster upon seeing him, leaving the dust he became to blow away into the wormhole he had created? That would explain why memories of him appear in various different places without explanation. A little part of him ended up all over the underground at different points in time. That also explains why we see one of the grey NPCs holding what he claims to be a part of Gaster. Part of what Gaster once was has materialised at this point of time in this specific universe, and so we can physically see a part of what used to be the royal scientist. In other words, Gaster seems to have created a teleporter crossed with a time machine. All he forgot to do was to fit it into a compact blue police box. The void is surely the darkest point in time imaginable, and so it's no surprise that photon readings were negative, and that the darkness kept spreading endlessly. Gaster had reached into a future that shouldn't be, and should never be seen, though once that realisation surely dawned on him, he was incapable of escaping it. At this point, he fell into the wormhole, as one of the grey NPCs mentions. By tumbling into his own creation, he sealed his own fate, destined to forever be split into a million different fragments and to never be whole again. One question remains, of course: what did Gaster seek to gain from creating a wormhole that could take him into the distant future? Well, the answer is simple enough. Surely the monsters would be free eventually. By going to the future, he could learn how it was done well in advance, before travelling back into the past to free everyone sooner rather than later. Gaster's incredible genius had created a foolproof plan to shatter the barrier through the power of science. The only thing he hadn't counted on was getting stuck within the void, unable to return. He can't really be blamed for not anticipating that he'd find a world devoid of life, though it seems even Gaster underestimated the power of determination. So, in conclusion, Gaster's final experiment seems to have been to use the immense power of the core to create a wormhole. While we can only guess as to his motives, it was very likely in order to find out how the barrier is eventually destroyed. Unfortunately, he fell into his own creation, and was either destroyed by the human or torn apart in the process itself. To not truly exist and to be unable to tell everyone of what he's learned must be torture for the former royal scientist. Perhaps Gonakid is a reflection of his inner fear of a world functioning without him, a world destined to be destroyed, at least in one particular timeline. Hopefully he finds himself within a timeline where the pacifist run was committed to, and maybe one day he'll be able to use his immense genius to break him out of the endless void. Well, that's about it for my speculations on Gaster today. To me though, this evaluation does make a lot of sense. It accounts for why darkness was referenced so many times in entry 17, what could have piqued the interest of an incredible mind such as Gaster's, and why in the end he was shattered across space and time. It also all ties into quantum physics, and as we know, Sans has a book on the subject, tying everything together. Be sure to let me know what you think in the comments. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video. Try not to fall into a wormhole that takes you to an apocalyptic future, and I'll see you next time. before I go, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to my patrons, my head scientists Asgore and She, Cameron Vigil, Kay Jensen and Sophronius, and my Underlab scientists Crystal Slate, Nicholas Dux, Armin Arlett, Marisa Ray, Corey Kidwell, Yushio Coroni, Sarah Wydra and Emily Greatwood. Thanks to the generosity of every name you see here, this channel is able to keep going. If you enjoyed this video, please consider checking out the Patreon link below, as well as the video that explains why I'd so massively appreciate your contribution.